Something's happening. Well, it's just connecting now. So just give it a sec. Here we go. I'll pop it. I'll pop it right underneath. Hold on. Live stream is here. There we go. Hopefully, I'm sure people will find it just by, because it like pops up on like live, doesn't it? So, okay. Right. So YouTube is connected. We've got the stream rolling. Ladies and gents, welcome back to Thompsin and Other Disappointments, episode 246 now. Guys, it's been a week, hasn't it? Lots has happened. As usual, very little of it makes sense because we live in a world of steadfast, unmedicatable lunacy, people. But don't worry, once again, it's 7:30 on a Friday night, so I am here to help you make sense of the senseless, to dance around the insanity as your veritable host of all the awfulness, pointing out the horrors of the modern world like I am the Willy Wonka of awful, ladies and gents. Climate change over here, fossil fuel scarcity over there. That is me, or as I'm more commonly known, Thompsin, your host. Pull up a chair, pull up a stool at the bar. Think of these shows, these podcasts, very much as last orders at the bar of the Titanic. We're screwed, guys. The world is coming to an end. It's over. Just grab yourself a beer and drink with me. Now, if you are a new listener or viewer, I do 2 shows a week. There's a solo one on Tuesday or Wednesday, and then I do like a live Friday one like we're doing right now, usually with a guest, where we try to put the world to rights over its many, many wrongs, okay? We look back on the week. We rip, roast, and ridicule the modern world. And also on a Friday night, we dish out the never coveted, yet somehow prestigious Tap Dancing Tosser Award. That's where we look at figures from within the worlds of politics and journalism. And I guess I essentially prosecute somebody each week for the crime of having brazenly performed their bellandry for all to see. It is the Tap Dancing Tosser Award, guys. So we're going to put that out a little bit later on. But my guest for this evening's show, guys, it's been a super secret special star guest all week. Super secret until now, ladies and gents. So please welcome to the show the inimitable, the knowledgeable, the charming FEMI OLUWOLE. Woo!
Yay me.
Yay you. How you doing, man?
Not so bad, not so bad. Yourself?
Yeah, good. I'm having a beer to wind down from what is, another week of insanity, right?
It's been fun.
It's been fun for you, right? It's been...
Yeah, I've had the far right on my tail. I've been trending on and off for the past 4 days. It's been nuts.
It's nice to be popular, right?
Oh yeah. If getting an onslaught of racist abuse once every 60 seconds for 4 days straight is how you would describe popular, including from the likes of Joey Barton and Tommy Robinson.
Oh wow.
That's fun.
I didn't realize it had sort of, I mean, to some extent with X, you assume that there is a level of contempt, of vitriol coming from the sort of quote unquote other side. You don't necessarily think it kind of like it bleeds out into this kind of layer of people here. You don't necessarily think it goes back up to higher profile individuals like a Barton, like a Robinson. So that's interesting.
But no. Apparently, I have that. I have the cut through, the worst kind of cut through that I can reach the upper echelons of shitty people.
Yeah.
So basically, I went on GMB to discuss Rule Britannia and whether or not the song should be ditched because it's racist. And the song talks about how we'll never be slaves, and brags about that. In fact. And so for that song to be put together at a time when we were actively engaged in the slave trade, it's like if a gang of, let's just say, assaulters decided to write a song about how they themselves would never be assaulted, you wouldn't sing that song as some sort of patriotic get-together. So it's obviously a problematic song. but that triggered the right. And apparently, the way to disprove my claims that the song "Rule Britannia" is a key touchstone of racist people in the UK is to send me an onslaught of racism 24/7 for 4 days.
Right. So sort of fighting fire with fire there a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So this week hasn't been a great time for you. I mean, like, we could just touch on the Rule Britannia thing for a second. It feels to me like if you look at a song like that. So when was that written? You'll probably know this, right?
1706.
Okay. So what was the British Empire doing in 1706? Like,
it was kidnapping and enslaving millions of black people in Africa and shipping them off to America in exchange for sugar and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Right. So to me, it sort of feels like if we like, I get there's a place for tradition. I get there's a there's British spirit wrapped up in it, and a lot of British people love going to things like the proms and singing these traditional songs. They don't necessarily think of the meaning behind the words, so that to some extent there's a naivety and an innocence to it. However, I also think there's a place for, like, have we not moved on? Like, can we not? Could nobody write a less problematic song in the last 300 years that isn't drenched in colonialism? And
exactly, I was on the BBC talking about it, and somebody asked me what I wanted to replace it. I was like, anything by the Spice Girls, something slightly more with more common appeal. But like, yeah, lots of people didn't know the problems with that song until I explained it to them, because it's a lot of it's innocent. Like, I used to sing this song, it made me feel uncomfortable, but I used to sing this song. It was only when I really fully understood exactly the history of the song and of slavery itself, I thought, oh, this is fucked up.
it's like the British establishment's version of, like, what's that Tom Jones Delilah, right? Like, everyone thinks of it. It's like, oh, it's a Tom Jones classic. Oh, he's a bit of a crooner, and then you listen to the words, you're like, he's done what to her? that's yeah. So anyway, okay, so you've had an interesting week.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, is there ever a point that you could imagine yourself getting to where you would just you'd be like, do you know what, I just can't take this anymore? Because you get more abuse than I mean, a lot of people on the left who are high profile get a lot of abuse, but you get, like, more.
Yeah, so
right?
the abuse that I get, it's in the upper levels of it. But at the same time, I get the racist stuff. Every now and then I'll speak to a female creator, a female influencer, and she will show me some of the DMs that she gets, and it's a different kettle of fish entirely.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say I got it the worst. It's somewhere up there in just the category of grossly unacceptable. Is there ever a point where I would say, all right, now time to pack it in? Two things to say about that. One is no, because my phrase is giving up is harder. If we give up, then that means that these sorts of people are the ones who set the agenda for the rest of our lives. And that makes our lives much harder than simply continuing with doing what we're doing right now. The other thing in terms of this abuse is, I could never give up. Yeah, I forgot what the other thing was. Sorry.
That's fine. I mean, it kind of taps into something that I remember you were saying last time you were on about, and I said, you know, is it never tempting to you with your degree, like, you could just go to a different country and then, you know, be a lawyer and just leave? And it sounded like you were driven by a sense of duty, like you have to continue pushing for this, because if you don't, yeah, like you say, like, the bad guys win almost.
Yeah. Exactly.
But
sorry,
and
I put out a video I think it was yesterday, about Brexit, and we'll get onto the stuff about that came out about Brexit this week, because it's been insane. But I managed to use a video from May 2016 of me saying what would happen, and that thing has now happened this week in an incredible way. And there are very few people that have actual footage of them being consistently right on the biggest policy of the last 10 years, going back as far as May 2016. And it's one of the reasons for the lack of trust in politics, because on the biggest issue of the last decade, pretty much every politician, I'd say the most politicians have flipped positions about 10 times. So of course there's a lack of trust there. And so when I look at the fact that I've actually got the credibility on this sort of on the biggest issue of the day, if I were to give up, that would be worse than most people giving up. It's a big deal. So yeah, I could never stop.
Yeah. I mean, it's very admirable. It is. I think I don't have the strength of character that you have. Like if I had your degree, but my principles, I'd just be like, I can't deal with this. This is just not what it has. Somebody shows me like a brochure of like a nice farm I could afford in like New Zealand. I'd be picturing my life there, like, oh yeah. And I'd be even meaner as well, Femi. Like I'd watch England burn from afar with my popcorn and beer. I'd be like, but
I would love to have an actual life with kids and stuff. Like I look at my parents. When my dad was my age, I was, I think, 4 or 5 years old. Like, and here I am still just doing my own thing. And that's the other thing I was going to say. I'm lucky in the sense of I don't have any dependents, so I can just go full martyr mode.
Yeah. Which is a big thing, right? Like people without kids or before they've had kids, I don't think they truly realize the amount of time and resource and money that they just gobble up. Like now I think back to what my life was like before I had kids. I'm like, what the fuck was I doing? Like, where did all that time go? Where did my 20s go? Like,
for me, it's Fortnite.
Yeah. Oh, really? That's where all your time goes.
Yeah, the spare time that would have been on building a life has gone on Fortnite.
Yeah, and ironically, it's like my son is on Fortnite also, but now he robbed. It's like the time sort of you bequeath the time of your own, like to your kid, don't you? Okay, cool. So I wanted to get your thoughts on a couple of news stories that have bubbled up this week. I was just having a scan back through TikToks and things that I've looked at this week. The first thing that bubbled up Monday, a tax evasion law that was designed by Theresa May and David Cameron, supposedly, to stop corporations from dodging tax, a la Starbucks and Google back then. This is, almost a decade ago, I think. It's failed to convict even one person or company in 6 years. So...
And we're surprised that, according to, I think it's the Equality Trust, the UK has the, I think it was fourth most financially unequal country in the world.
Yeah.
Sorry, in Europe.
Yeah.
And I think the top amongst advanced nations. It's insane, and it's because we choose to let people get away with not paying tax. Our largest vehicle for redistribution of wealth, we're simply not making sure it works properly. It's nuts.
Yeah. And it's like, so I was reading this sort of counter argument, if you could call it that. Like I was like, let's see the context. I mean, there must be some reason, or at least some pretense of a reason as to why they would not have even tried to claw back some of this money. And the nearest I could get to it was them saying, well, when we go after a Google or a Starbucks, because they are very wealthy and international companies, they have very expensive lawyers. Yeah. And so then the lawyers push back and they delay things, and it just becomes this bit. It's just much easier if we go after the little guy. I was like, this is doing nothing for, like you say, like trust in politics, trust that things could improve. Like, what difference is it going to make if you get a Labour administration in if actually the tax avoidance situation isn't addressed, right?
Jesus. Well, that's the, yeah. Okay. So I'm generally, and I'm going to get to this later, much more hopeful about the future of the UK. But that's a pretty fucked up thing that puts a crimp in my step. If the more powerful they are, the harder it is to actually call back the tax on them. That's that does make things difficult.
Well, I'll give you some time to sort of process the hate around that. We'll move on to the second story of the week. This wasn't really a story in the mainstream, like in the newspapers or anything. It was more like confined to Twitter, but I thought it was worth mentioning. It was this sudden slew, which, if we're holding our hands up and we're being fully honest about it, can usually mean, or can sometimes mean, that it is the result of bot farms, right? If you suddenly get a lot of accounts talking about very similar thing, but they're all like faceless, sock puppet looking things, it can just be a coordinated thing. But I don't think this was. It was a slew of upper middle class seeming families on Twitter suddenly caring about cost inflation, but only specifically when it's tied to private school fees. I don't know if you saw this.
Yes, I think I saw. I think I saw something about that. But I think there was. I saw a bit about that. But a lot of it was fears about what would happen if we had a Labour government and they started taxing private schools.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
the stories must have been slightly linked, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so it's. I mean, I think the Labour taking away the VAT status from the private schools or taking away charity status. I can't remember which it is now. That was first floated 2 or 3 months ago, right? But since then, it's sort of done the same thing as inheritance tax did, where like every 6 weeks it bounces back up into the periphery. And this week it was there was a couple of reasonably big accounts on Twitter who was like, one of them wrote like a big long like 5 or 6 paragraph thing saying, I'm laying awake at night terrified about what this Labour policy is going to do to me. The hike in private school fees, you know, we work really hard. My husband earns 75 grand a year. He works really hard for it. We're trying to push our kids to have the life that we never had, and this isn't fair, and we don't know how we're going to afford it. And then somebody went into this woman's tweet history, as you do, and they dug out a tweet by her to somebody else from a couple of months ago where she's doing that like right-wing thing where she's like, if you can't afford kids, don't have them.
Oh God.
I was like, it's perfect. Like, I mean, you dream of finding like an antidote tweet like that. You know, when they say there's always a tweet or like this you, I mean, but that's just.
For me, my favorite thing about it is that they tell on themselves so much every time they do this whole, we work really hard to provide for our kids. That's why we deserve better than you other people who are also working just as hard.
Yeah.
Like, it's that lack of awareness of the fact that other people work just as hard as you, but don't get to send their kids to thousands of pounds a year school.
Exactly. Yeah. It's, I think this sort of actually, maybe the reason that the Twitter accounts were blowing up about this is because there was a Telegraph blog or piece earlier in the week or last weekend where there was a very well-to-do family and they were saying they didn't think they should be penalised for sending their kid to private school, quote, we are not wealthy. And my girlfriend went to private school and she has a completely different look. I showed her the thing and I was like, they don't even understand how ridiculous they sound. And she was like, but if they're working hard and they're trying to give their kids a better thing, and then they suddenly get hit with this new thing for like £500 a month more or £1,000 a month more, like that's, you know, you have to have sympathy with them being. I'm like, but they have a choice, right? They can take their kids out of school. And she's like, would you take our son out of school and traumatize him, drag him away from his friend? And then I was like, I get it, but also they are buying privilege still. So.
Yeah. Like, I think it's the reason why.
Oh, I hope we haven't lost you. You've frozen, or is it me that's frozen? Oh no, guys, have we lost Femi? Live TV, guys, are you back?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, I was just about to text you in a panic there.
By definition, private schools are a vehicle against social mobility. They're designed to ensure that inequality in society stays there. So the idea that they should get charity status just doesn't make sense. It should be the default that everybody gets the same. You are paying to make sure that inequality stays in society.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was a little bit more sarcastic than that when I ended up sort of clapping back to my missus, going like, you know what, if they can't afford it, they should just go and knock on the headmistress's door and ask them very nice, because it's a charity, isn't it? They'll be nice to them. They'll just give it away. It's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's inescapable, isn't it? The what's the word? Like the increasing of the quality of your life, like your life chances that you. That you benefit from going to an institution like that. I
think it's something along the lines of it's something ridiculous, like 30% of people at Oxford and Cambridge are at private school compared to like 7% of the population that goes there, something like that.
Yeah, and it's like if you go into, I know not everything is London, but if you go into sort of big London industries, the city, like banking, insurance, tech, broadcasting, 7% we say like go to private school, and yeah, it's about 50 to 60% of people that
Yeah.
dominate those industries, those corporations, those board roles that are privately educated. So it is inescapable the leg up that it gives you.
Yeah. Uh,
Um,
Not just in terms of the education, but also the connections, because it means that you're going to school with other people, with your friends, and your friends will have rich parents, which will work in rich sectors, and you'll be able to get those letters of recommendations,
mm,
those connections to maybe get a job when you leave school, all those sorts of things. And I went to private school for 11 out of my 14 years of schooling, so I was primarily in private school, and you do see the difference in personalities between they're like basically two types of people that go to private school. One recognizes that, well, one believes that they deserve to be there, like
mm,
they believe they're better than everybody else, and the rest is acutely aware we don't deserve this kind of leg up,
right.
and that leads to two very different types of people when they go up into the real world. One is just basically saying, I only really empathize with people that went to private school, and therefore I only really care about those sorts of people, and therefore I'm going to pass policies that penalize working class people and in favor of the rich people. And the other type says, no, we had a leg up. Let's try and level the playing field as much as we can.
Mm.
And you can see that really clearly when you look at Parliament, especially.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know a fair few people who've been privately educated. I'm happy to say that most of them, I've got no bad words to say. Like, they don't come across as sort of callous or unempathetic. Like, they're very left leaning in their attitudes and sensibilities. But I have heard some horror stories as well. I've heard stuff like people privately educated people talking to people who come from a state school background who they don't know they came from a
Mm.
state school background, and they refer to people like they're like, if you send your kids to a state school, they're going to come out as chavs. And then this person then comes away to me and goes like, can you believe what that motherfucker just said to me? Like, so
Yeah.
it's like then it sort of breeds a lack of trust, doesn't it? It's like, well, what are they saying? Like, if they knew that I went to a state school, would they not say things to me?
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway,
Exactly.
let's move on to the next one. And then I've got a little game that I'd like to play with you, Femi, if that's
I
okay.
love this.
Okay. So the next story that bubbled up this week was the obsession with the royal family. Sarah has been diagnosed with skin cancer. Kate has a mystery abdominal thing. Wills is juggling the kids. Curiously, no mention in any of the coverage of their house staff, nannies, au pairs, and so on. But this has been, again, like dominating certainly the Mail, the Express, the Telegraph, is this ongoing obsession with the royal family. Like, they are our national soap opera, is how I sort of look at them now. But I talked a bit about this on last week's show. I also think it's really interesting that it's only like 2 weeks. I know January seems like a long, long time, but it's only 2 weeks since the Andrew Epstein stuff blew up again. And then 2 weeks down the line, we've got all these royal health problems and stuff. It's like, it's something. Let me pick your brain on this. Do you think it's beyond the realms of possibility that Buckingham Palace PR department have actually strategized all of this?
Wait, are we suggesting that either it's all made up or the firm just like gave them all COVID or something?
I think. Well, so we are not suggesting this. So I'm going to protect you from this.
Of course, we're not suggesting this. Of course,
I'm suggesting they've made the whole thing. No, I'm suggesting that they might not have made it all up, but they may have coordinated, carpet bombed the news with their individual health things deliberately to garner sympathy and to shift the narrative on from what was an incredibly awkward fortnight with the Andrew related headlines. Do you think that's possible?
It is 100% the sort of thing that they would do. I mean, we've seen the sort of way they've tried to control the press in terms of which stories go out from which people, which leaks happen when, We saw that with all the various documentaries that the Harry and Meghan did.
Mm.
This is the sort of thing that they would do. Whether or not they're doing it in this situation is anybody's guess. But I think the main thing is that nobody really cares. I don't think people really care, because I think for a lot of people, we like the Queen. We like the Queen because she was a queen, and yes, queen. But having a king is so incredibly basic that I just don't think anybody's interested in the royal family that much. Certainly not millennial and below.
Yeah. And it's, I don't know if you saw the stat that came out, I think just last week, or maybe it was even just shy before all of these health things started kicking off. But it was support, like popular support for the royal family, for the monarchy as is, has dropped below 50% for the first time.
Okay. Well, I guess your theory does lend credence to your theory that they say, oh, they don't like us anymore. Like, come on, like us. What if we die? What if we all die?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if they would have said it quite like that. But yeah, I just think it's really interesting that it's like this happened and now all of these things are happening. And I'm thinking, like, so every time Andrew gets in trouble, every time Andrew is another form of embarrassment to them, then another member of the wider royal family will come down with something, you know?
Yeah, that does seem like it's a good strat. It's a good strat.
Yeah. Okay, so now I would like to play a game with you, Femi Oluwole. Last time you were on the show, I mentioned this a short while ago. You came across as though you were driven. You had principles, you're a good guy, you're doing this all for the good of the country, you're campaigning to, reverse Brexit, to get proportional representation in. All of these things are coming from a good place. You're a good person. And I've met you in person and you come off as a good guy. So.
I'm waiting for the but.
You're very perceptive. Yeah. So, you're a good guy and perceptive. So. Be that as it may, good guy Femi, I thought, as this show is a Thompsin and Other Disappointments, we tend to sort of coast on the fumes of negativity and pessimism. I thought it might be fun to play a game called Break Femi.
Oh, let's do this.
Okay. So, we're going to unwrap the decoration of positivity to you, optimism, friendliness, all of that, and we are going to peel this onion. In we go.
Let's do it.
So, what is the last thing you did that you really wish you didn't?
Ooh. Last thing I did or wish I didn't.
Take as long as you like. We're not monetized, so we're not going to cut to an ad break. I'll just hold on. I'll type something to the guys in here. Wait, Q&A questions for me and Femi. Go.
Oh, I missed a TV appearance because I didn't check my text for 2 days straight.
Oh, mate, come on.
That was bad.
Can we muckrake here a little bit? Like, who was it? Who did you pie off?
Another one would be.
You're not going to tell me. Who did you wake up and go like, oh, I'm not going to that.
Okay, well, let's just say the top 3 news channels in the UK. It was one of those.
Okay.
And I messed up badly.
Okay. It's very diplomatic.
Yeah.
We'll just be left to wildly speculate, which of course we will do now in the chat. Okay. Good answer. What is the worst thing you've ever done? So that was the last thing you wish that you hadn't done, but now let's pan out your entire life. What's the worst thing you've ever done?
Oh, I think I pulled one of my teacher's skirts down when I was 9 in front of the entire school.
Oh wow. Okay.
That wasn't good. I also got.
You didn't even need to wait like sort of 20 seconds to think of that. So that's obvious. It plays on your mind. Forgive yourself, Femi. You're a child, for goodness sake. Yes, it's a podcast, but it's also therapy. Okay. Okay. If this next question 3, if this were just a chat between you and I, nobody watching,
yeah,
which could actually be quite a realistic scenario, you know, like you may not even need to imagine that nobody's watching. But let's just say it was just you and me, you know, we're just talking in the pub, and I asked you this. If I said, hey, Femi, what's your favourite swear word when there's no cameras on you? What would you say?
I think I'm definitely sticking with fuck. It's definitely fuck.
I like how adaptable it is. Like it works in every situation. I mean, I'm more of a C-bomb guy, but I wouldn't expect you to do that. I mean, you don't want to get, you know.
There's a TikTok that's like probably fuck.
But it's so malleable of a swear word,
yeah.
isn't it? It's like you can bookend other words onto it. It can mean a good thing or a bad thing. It's, you know, I'm feeling it.
Although I do like using shit in places where you would expect to hear a fuck. Like, how the shit did you do that? That sort of way.
Yeah, because I tell you what, like when you switch out a word, like a swear word like that, where the other one would normally be more appropriate, it's like it creates a haywire like circuit thing.
Exactly.
Why the shit would you do? You're like, huh? Where did you learn to swear? Like,
exactly.
Yeah. I'd go with, I think the C-bomb for me, but then motherfucker, I think, just underneath as a number 2. Okay, question 4. Who has a really punchable face?
Well, if you would ask half of Twitter, it'd probably say me.
Okay.
I cannot ever be on record as condoning political violence, so I'm going to pass on that one.
Fair. You're going to plead the 5th. Smart man. Okay, last one. Last one of these horrible break Femi questions. It's probably the worst one, though. Let's just set expectations there. If the Tories said they would reverse Brexit, but Labour said they wouldn't, would you vote Tory?
See, this is the messed up thing, because if the only policies they had were that, then yes, but with Tory comes everything else they're doing in terms of fascism, racism, sexism, inequality, and general corruption. However, in the position we're at right now, where Labour isn't really offering particularly left-wing policies anyway, and they're basically chasing the Tory votes, there isn't that much difference between the leadership and the policy plans of Labour to the policy plans of the Tories. And so one would think, well, why not add an extra 4% to the economy and take £1,000, give £1,000 extra to every family and household in the country?
Yeah.
I would have to go with, on balance, I'd probably have to say Labour on the hopes that they'd at least give us a softer Brexit.
Yeah.
And then hopefully fix more things.
That's interesting. So soft Brexit with Labour over rejoining with the Tories. I mean,
from a practical standpoint, I don't. In terms of what are my actual real priorities that I think has to happen within the next 5 years.
Yeah.
The rejoining of the single market and customs union, which can be done in a matter of months, that's the priority, because that's the thing that's actually going to improve people's lives. The official rejoining, getting a seat at the table, that sort of stuff. Yes, that's a political ambition, which we should aim for, but that's not what's actually going to change things for people. So a soft Brexit would be the immediate priority.
Can I just ask, and I'm not sort of like challenging you, because I'm sure that you know way more about this. I'm just genuinely interested. So with the 4% GDP, like this is something that gets talked about quite a lot with Brexit. And the aspiration to reverse it. Sorry. When I was talking to one of my Brexiter friends, he's a financier. He's like a hedge fund guy, and I was saying about reversing Brexit, and I was like, you know, here we've got 2 main parties who are obsessed with achieving growth. And yet neither one of them are talking about the one way that I would envisage that you could achieve that relatively quickly. And his pushback on that was like, look at the Eurozone aid. He was like, look at France, look at Germany. He was like, do you see any of these countries growing? Do you see the Eurozone as a whole growing? And I was like, honestly, I don't know. Like, I'm not an economist. I'm just sort of going off what I've heard and like what I've read from the news sources that I consume, right? So when you say rejoining the single market and to get that sweet 4% GDP, is that like, how does that work? How do you reconcile that with the reports that the Eurozone is struggling?
So there's so much in there. There's the fact that the Eurozone is something we were never part of. It's the Euro.
Oh, I see.
And so there's lots of problems with the Euro, which I don't think we should ever join because of that. I don't think you can have monetary union without tax union because it messes up the policies. But the main point is this argument of, look how bad Germany's doing, look how bad France is doing, therefore Brexit was the right decision. It is the most stupid argument I've heard in a very long time.
Right.
It is almost as bad as literally not understanding basic addition and subtraction.
Right.
Like, even if you take Brexit out of it, there are things that can happen in economies that have nothing to do with Brexit. Economies have gone up and down all across the world. The question of Brexit is making things better or worse than we would have been if not for Brexit.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Like, Germany doing bad, unless you can say Germany having free trade access with all of its neighbors is the reason why it's doing poorly, then your argument makes no sense at all. Like, us having free trade with the EU can only be a good thing because we're seeing the cost that it's causing to those countries. If you're not explaining why a lack of trade barriers is the reason why the EU is struggling, your argument for why we should have those trade barriers has no logic behind it whatsoever.
Okay, I shall try to bank that and then retail it to him next time. I also wanted to pick your brain on like the immigration side of it. So I was sort of wargaming this a little bit in my brain. This is going back a couple of months now, and I was like, if you looked at Brexit through the prism of cheap European labour, and you suddenly turned off that tap, the idea, I guess, would be that companies, like domestic companies, would then be forced to hire locals wouldn't do it for the same rates as Eastern Europeans, so then the companies would be forced to raise wages and salaries to attract the staff in, but that doesn't really seem to have happened. So what are your thoughts on why that would be frustrated, why that hasn't come to pass?
I think there's going to be an element of we've simply seen there'll be an element of, well, if you're not going to do it, if we can't get the sorry, starters, we have had lots of record levels of immigration, so we have been taking people from across Europe. Secondly, I'd say that what a lot of the policies of the Tory government have been, let's just import cheap stuff from abroad so we don't have to pay people to make the stuff here.
Right.
And thirdly, I'd say that the entire argument of we'll get better wages if we don't have immigration, it's based on this side. It's based on a faulty premise, because we've seen the idea would be, well, if the workers are the only people, if there are few workers here, then they have more bargaining power to say we'll get better wages. But every time we've seen workers try and demand better wages in this country, what has the Tories' response been?
Yeah.
Well, how dare you go on strike? How dare you withdraw your labor? They're the exact opposite of everything they claim to be trying to chase with this whole "we'll get you better wages" thing. They've been clamping down on wages like they've done since Margaret Thatcher. So yeah, that's an entire lie. The problem is we often look at immigration through despite being on the left, we look at it through a right-wing lens. We look at it through the capitalist lens of, well, if there are more people, then the employers have more people to choose from. So the employer has the whip hand and can basically choose what they want to pay because it's supply and demand. We should be looking at it as, no, if we have strict rules in this country, strong unions that prevent the exploitation of people on lower wages, then it doesn't matter if people from abroad are potentially willing to work for lower. No, we set industry standards for this is what you get paid. That's how our economy should be functioning. It's because we have a system that allows people to be exploited on lower wages that we end up with the exploitation and the drop in wages.
See, I wondered if it might be like, so there's two things that leapt to mind. The first one was that because we live in a globalized world, because so many of these companies are like multinational, if you start making it hard for them to hire in talent in Middlesbrough or Essex or wherever, and they know that that might just be the catalyst for them to go, do you know what, why are we hanging around here? Like, it's so much cheaper to go over to Poland directly, or to go to,
Yep. And we've seen businesses leaving.
Yeah. So there's that. The other thing that came to the fore as I was wargaming was that if we had a Brexiter Tory government who wanted to spark wage growth with Brexit in that capacity, then surely they should be front of the queue to say, okay, well, it's harder for us in councils, in the fire service, in the police. It's harder for us to hire these people because we've got less immigration. So I tell you what we're going to do to set the tone. We're going to hire, we're going to heighten wages and salaries for these roles, and then we'll be an example in this new Brexit paradigm. But it's interesting. It's actually the complete opposite to that, isn't it? Like they've done the Brexit. They've gone, oh, I'm sure wage growth will come along any minute now. And then they're like, oh, by the way, teachers, less money, nurses, less money.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. You're right. The idea that they should have tried to deliver wage inflation, but they have gone the exact opposite direction.
Yeah,
it's because they never care. Wage inflation of jobs like doctors, nurses, firefighters, teachers is the exact opposite. It means giving to the poor and taking from the rich, effectively, and that's the exact opposite of what they stand for. We have, I think, 63% of Tory members are fundamentally against the idea of spending money to help poor people, compared to about 13% that were in favor of it. That's who the Tories are.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this was something that was really hammered home to me, a couple of months ago, when one of the many times that inheritance tax has sort of come up front pages of the newspapers, was that when you have a national debt as colossal as ours, and taxes so high to service that debt, once the problems that come along with that start knocking on the middle and upper middle classes' doors, then they have a really difficult decision to make, because they want to cut taxes for themselves, but they can't realistically do that while the debt is this high, unless they slash welfare and make already broke, miserable people's lives infinitely harder. Like, we've already been through 10 years of austerity and had people just cut back to the bare minimum. Now you've got this class of people up here going like, well, I still think taxes are too high. And yes, we've borrowed all of this money, but I don't want it coming knocking on my door. So if I have to slash you to the bone to get a nice, sweet little cut to inheritance tax, that's where we are now, you know?
No, that's precise. I mean, it's that mentality that gave Rishi Sunak the feeling that it would be okay for him to say, yeah, I defund deprived urban areas in favor of rich ones.
Yeah.
It's that mentality that allows for that.
Which is, of course, what he said in the, I want to say caucus. Is it caucus in the UK? It's a word. It's like caucus. It's left my head. But in the run-up to the leadership. Tory party leadership.
Hustings.
Yes. Hustings, that's the word. It's not even close to caucus, is it? What am I talking about? Okay, so this week's Tap Dancing Tosser Award, FEMI. Previous winners, if you can call them that, include Johnny Mercer, Nadim Zahawi, who else have we had? Sean Bailey was the other week. Who, if you had to nominate somebody for the Tap Dancing Tosser Award this week, is anybody leaping to mind?
There are two, and they're both because of what they've done on Brexit. Right. One is Rishi Sunak. His offer to the DUP is that basically they're going to make it so that every law the UK passes is going to have to be screened to make sure that it doesn't create any trade barriers in the Irish Sea, which means that from now on, if this offer is accepted, all UK law can't really diverge away from EU law, because obviously Ireland has the EU laws. And this is the way to solve the Northern Irish border situation, which means that we will end up copying EU laws, but no longer being able to influence them in the name of taking back control. It is the biggest Brexit betrayal one could possibly ever imagine.
But so you must be, is that not good news though? Like if we're aligning ourselves broadly, informally with the EU? Like, you must be kind of
Exactly.
happy.
It's great news, but it's just like it's what I was saying before. I've got a video of me saying in 2016, and I made the video in May 2016, saying that if we leave the EU, we won't have to do this to pass the same rules as the EU, but we'll end up having to do roughly the same things in order to stay competitive.
Yeah.
And I predicted that in May 2016. Here we are 8 years later, and it's now about to be official government policy.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the other thing is, and I'm sure you all know this already, but you know, for the benefit of viewers, the other thing is like even the argument that we could dilute regulation, that we could cut the red tape, like that's certainly true of things that only affect our own domestic like land area, right? So stuff like sewage in the rivers, like Europe are not necessarily going to care about that. But in terms of product, in terms of selling stuff to other markets, even if we're not selling to European countries, if we're selling to other countries who are tied up in trade deals with European countries, then chances are they're going to hold standards up to the massive European market.
Yep.
They're not going to like renege on that to please little old Blighty, right?
Yeah, exactly. The other tap dancer is Kemi Badenoch.
Can I just say, I love that we've touched on like favorite swear words, and you know that was in the break Femi section, and it's I felt a bit mean like towards the end of that, but I love the fact that now we're into the tap dancing tosser segment. You can't quite bring yourself to say tosser.
I could say tap dancing tosser.
Oh.
I just forgot. I forgot the third word.
Oh, fair enough. Okay.
So I shortened it to tap dancer.
Okay.
But Kemi Badenoch, she said the reason why we haven't got a deal with the US is because Trump lost the election.
Right.
So the big promise of don't worry, we don't need the EU to trade. We can just trade with America. They're a much bigger market. That's completely fallen to shit. And the reason she's given is because we no longer have Big Daddy Trump. And the problem with that rhetoric is when the referendum happened, you had Barack Obama saying you'll be at the back of the queue for a deal with the US if you vote to leave. The Brexiteers didn't believe him, and now that's coming true. The second thing is, if her answer, the thing that would make Brexit a huge success, is Donald Trump, well, what was it? I think it was in 2017. He went on a huge rant where he said, the Americans pay far too much for our medicines, and it's because of socialized healthcare across the world. So I'm going to make sure that all those freeloading health services will pay more for their drugs so that we pay less in any trade deal that I negotiate. And so his plan explicitly was to make the NHS pay more for drugs. And right now we're having a major medicine shortage, and it's been made worse by Brexit because of all the red tape. And Kemi Badenoch's solution is a guy that planned to make that medicine shortage even worse.
Yeah.
So yes, tap dancing tosser.
I love the vitriol on it as well. So yes, Aid, tap dancing tosser. Yeah, I mean the thing about the Donald Trump and Brexit thing that always got me was like, you know, here we are banging our pots and pans about sovereignty, about independence, and yet the flip side to that coin always seems to be a sort of weird subservience to America. It's like, oh, we don't need Europe. We'll leave the EU. Yeah, we're going to leave the... And then on the flip, like within a blink of an eye, we're willing to bend over backwards and go running to Trump or Trump's America, begging for that trade. It's like all you're doing is passing the driving seat to another big trade bloc.
Exactly. The extent to which we've essentially tried to replicate what we had with the EU, only with less say and less power and less economic benefits, is wild. Like joining the CPTPP is insane. Like one of their goals is eventually to move towards harmonization of laws, having similar laws. Like same with ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. All the big major groupings are all regional across the world because everybody sensible knows you do most of your trade with the countries that are right next door. The idea that we can form strong trade relationships that can replace what we had with the EU, with China, with Asian countries, with America, is just geographically stupid.
Yeah. I mean, it's like since the first like radicalizations of Brexit, I remember thinking like, even if you take all of like the heated up rhetoric out of it, if you just look at trade and the history of trade, not that I'm an expert in it, but just from a layman's perspective, I'm like, trade brings peace to neighboring countries if they all work together. If you break away from that, you isolate yourself. You actually create a candidate for invasion by doing that historically. So there's that. The second thing is like, yeah, as you rightly point out, like the world is actually getting smaller. When you look at countries pairing up, new trade blocks, like at some point they will become political. That's just the nature of the beast. So yeah, I don't know.
It's because I mean, one of the greatest lies of Brexit was this idea of no, when in 1975 we voted for an economic union, not a political union, which is total bullshit, because the biggest barrier to trade is having different regulations, having to make your products comply with the regulations of different countries, which sends costs through the roof. So you've got to make those regulations the same. But who makes regulations? Politicians in parliaments and stuff. So you have to have a degree of political union in order to get economic union. That's just common sense. It was all a lie.
Yeah. Okay, so Kemi Badenoch, Rishi Sunak. I'm gonna leave those two as nominees, as second and third place.
Okay.
This week's Tap Dancing Tosser Award. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, so last week's, or like the previous recipients, last week's one went to a Daily Mail journalist called Liz Jones for her over-the-top piece about an almost certainly imaginary woman in a park who was so devastated and emotionally affected by the news of Kate's going into hospital that apparently this woman stopped and stared at her phone, took her mittens up from her phone to her aghast mouth. How she was working her phone with these mittens on, we still don't fully understand. Anyway, obviously made up story, I feel. So that was last week, Liz Jones. This week's Tap Dancing Tosser Award, Simon Clarke. For impressively leading the journo political class right to the top of the hill, guys, earlier this week, only to have his leadership challenge to Rishi Sunak deflate and falter before it had even begun. Though that didn't stop political editor of the Beano, Harry Cole, from seemingly taking this at face value and reportedly running with it. I mean, I say reportedly. No one has seen Harry Cole running for literally years. So yes, Simon Clarke, take a bow. You are this week's Tap Dancing Tosser. Woo! Right, I was about to say we've come to the end, but we might have some Q&A here, Femi. So let's just quickly go into the chat. Are you ready? I suspect these questions will be nicer than the Break Femi ones. So let's go.
I love a tough question.
Right, here we go. Duke Vengeance says, "Are we doomed?"
No, I'm extremely positive about the future for a number of reasons. One, as many of you have heard me say before, in almost every single election since the Second World War, the majority has voted for parties to the left of the Conservatives. We are a progressive voting country. All that needs to happen is for us to have a voting system where every vote counts equally. And given that the majority of the Labour Party, its members, are massively in favour of changing the voting system to proportional voting system, once we do get the Tories out, we will actually have a party in power that answers, in theory, to members who want a fair voting system. So the path to changing UK politics, delivering progressive politics for the rest of our lives, is there for the taking. Not to mention, Gen Z is revolutionizing where we're about to head. They simply will not tolerate this crap. I often joke that when I'm speaking to boomers, millennials, we were your last chance to come quietly. Gen Z will not stand for this.
Yeah, fair. Richard Marsden says, "What are you most proud of?" This is like the antidote to the like, what's the worst thing you ever did? Now Richard's like, well, hang on a second, let's keep it light. What's the thing you're most proud of?
I think it was what I mentioned earlier. The fact that I've got footage of me being correct consistently on the biggest policy of the last 10 years, right from May 2016 up to now, I think that's gives me a degree of confidence in politics that not many people can have.
Yeah, and indeed, like even probably outside of politics, it just in your judgment, in your ability to perceive and to
know where things were going to go with this issue.
Yeah,
My understanding of British politics in 2016 was crap. I mean, bargain basement crap. So I'm genuinely shocked that the guy who I was back then could have figured this out. So I'm grateful for that almost.
Who's the stupidest person you've been forced to debate on TV? That's from Kerry.
Oh, that's fun.
I wish I'd asked the Patreon. So Kerry's one of my patrons. I wish I'd asked them like for these questions in advance, because I would have I would have gone onto YouTube to find like an interview where they'd asked you something like, and they asked the other one, and then their response to it is so light speed dumb that the camera then goes over, and I just love a little cut of you going like,
yeah. I think I lean towards Mark Francois and Karl Malone would definitely be high up there.
Okay.
Because it's bad. Like Mark Francois, because he's that one that said when I said that every medical body in the UK, from the British Medical Association, Royal College of Nurses, Royal College of Midwives, Royal College of Radiologists, all saying Brexit will be bad.
Yeah.
And he said, well, we don't know. That's an opinion.
Yeah.
And then he said, let's try it. And bear in mind, he said this in January 2020. Let's try weakening our health service in January 2020. How did that go?
Yeah.
And then Karl Malone, because one time when the Black Lives Matter protesters, they put up a statue of a Black Lives Matter protester in place of Edward Colston, which technically you require a permit for, so it's not fully legal. And it was the same week that Banksy did some graffiti on an underground tube, on a tube.
Right.
And I was like, well, they're both acts of defiance. They're both acts of civil disobedience. And she was like, no. And she was like fully condemning the Black Lives Matter one. I was like, all right, so if you do something, if you put up a statue in the name of anti-racism and equality for Black people, that's a crime. But if you graffiti a train, that's okay. Yes. and the way she even realized, like, she after the break, she was like, I'm gonna get destroyed on Twitter for that.
Yeah.
Like, it was obviously stupid.
Well, at least there's some reflection there. You know?
Yeah.
Is she one of these people? Maybe you don't feel comfortable answering this, but is she one of these people like which I've heard of, like where on the TV they are forthright, fire-breathing, right-winger Daily Mail types? They hate the NHS, they hate the BBC, blah blah blah. And then once the cameras are off, you talk to them in the green room. Then they're like, I just do that stuff for the TV. I like making good spicy TV. You know, is it like that?
So with Karl Malone, it's tricky because it's when we were really, like, we had a really good working relationship. My mom used to think of her as my TV mom. Like we got on really well. But the more we interacted with each other on air, the more she realized that every time I would face her, I would make her say something brain deadly stupid, and then she would get it in the neck on Twitter because she'd be exposed for it. And so she sort of soured on me more and more until she eventually blocked me, and then I'm almost certain asked to never be put with me again.
Oh wow!
So she's like that.
Imagine having that mentality. And look, Carol, if you're watching, I'm sure you're not, but if you do see this, I just like there's a few hard feelings, but if like imagine having the psychology where rather than reflect on the things that you're saying and the opinions that you're holding, your anger or your consideration is instead reserved for, I don't like the way that this guy made me say a stupid thing, and now I feel silly about it. Like, how about you stop saying the stupid stuff?
Right? Right.
Wouldn't that be easier?
It's insane. Like, and another comparison would be Piers Morgan. What you see is what you get to a certain extent. Like when I would walk into GMB, off air, he'd be the exact same. Like I'd walk in and he'd start arguing with me the moment he saw me, and then what you'd see on camera would be basically just a continuation of the argument we were having off air.
Right.
But he was also a huge hypocrite because when I asked him, despite us going back and forth on Twitter for years, when I asked him to challenge the policing bill, which was going to criminalize noisy protest, I said, "Hey, Mr. Free Speech, want to say something?" That was when he decided to block me.
Yeah.
So Mr. Free Speech does not care about free speech.
Did you ever hear him justify that at all? Did he come out with a line like, "Oh, well, this is different because," or?
No, he said he literally has never addressed it head on. His excuse is, "Well, Femi, you just got too annoying."
Right.
No, we've been going back and forth on every topic imaginable, but when it got into free speech and we realized that he was essentially being silent on an issue where the right was silencing the left. That's something he didn't want to be drawn on, and therefore, bye for me. I'm out of the conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Let's do. We'll do 2 more questions. Super Tansky is in the chat. She's saying, "Ask Femi if he would prefer a spring or summer wedding."
It'd have to be spring. A, because I'm urgent. We need to get this done. B,
don't be having kids just yet. I mean, just put it off long as you can.
Okay. Secondly, because I would sweat in a summer wedding. I don't want to sweat through my suit, so it'd have to be spring.
Okay. Good answer. Louise Darby says, "Why isn't Elvis shunned as a paedophile?" I mean, we haven't touched on Elvis at all tonight, but it's a valid question.
So... Why haven't we touched on Elvis? Why don't we do that every day? Because it was of the time. Just like everything is suddenly okay if you wind the clocks back a bit. He was also famous, a man, white, and sang well. We have accepted so much stuff from people that can sing well that is insane. Not just white people. Chris Brown definitely as well. The fact that he's still able to go on stage without everybody saying, "No, why is this man not in jail?" is insane to me. But we seem to have lower levels for our celebrity singers than we do for normal people and politicians, in fact. And certainly being on Epstein's list didn't stop anybody from carrying on their day. I think it's just the protection that certain celebs get.
I think it's so when you say it was like of a time, I feel like I interpret that as rather than like, oh, it happened ages ago, so let's forget it. Like, it's more like there was so little protection for vulnerable kids around that time, and so much adulation just thrown at people like it's like the most famous guy ever, Elvis Presley. And there were just different attitudes. Like, I don't even know if the word paedophile really got into my vocabulary until like the Holly and Jessica story, like in the late 90s. Was that, or early noughties? Like the Ian Huntley thing. So I don't think there was the same hysteria around that as there is now. So I think that's probably a large part of it. And now, but do you know what? Like, even accepting all of that, it is an interesting area to sort of probe, because he did move Priscilla Presley into his mansion when she was like 14 or something.
There's lots and lots of stories of, especially in rock and roll, of people who just married way, way too young.
Well, not even married. Like, have you heard the stuff about Led Zeppelin? Like,
I'm guessing I wouldn't have known it, but yes,
horrendous. It's like, but this is the thing. It's like, you look at stories about, say, Michael Jackson, right? And you look at stories about Gary Glitter, and all of this stuff is rightly horrifying, right? And then you read some like rock biography and like accounts that have been backed up by other people, like other like groupies, I guess is the problematic way of describing it from back in the day. But like, I mean, these girls were like flagrantly underage, and all this stuff is known about, but nobody ever fucking talks about it. And I'm like, how can it be for one person over here? Like, for example, so with Philip Schofield, that stuff blew up like only a few months ago. And that guy was like, I mean, I know he met him when he was like 15 or 14, didn't he? But supposedly nothing happened until he was like of age.
Yeah. So there's questions about the notion of grooming, but nobody can nail it down, seemingly.
Right. But it's so problematic to people that it became a tabloid explosion for like 2 weeks.
Yep.
And yet these stories that horrify or would horrify the same like boomers and TV Times buyers and This Morning viewers will happily just turn a blind eye to Elvis and Led Zeppelin. Like Led Zeppelin come on the radio, they'll be like, oh yeah, I love this. And it's just...
It reminds me of a Chris Rock joke. He said, you know how much we love Michael? We love Michael so much, we let the first kid slide.
Yeah. And there's what he does a joke on his latest one where he says, what is it? He's like, people, it's called selective outrage. And he's like having a pop at people who will like campaign to cancel R. Kelly, get R. Kelly removed from Spotify. But nobody will ever campaign to get Michael Jackson because he's so like, there's a talent thing there, isn't it? It's like, I don't know. Anyway, listen, Femi, man, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Guys, do go give Femi a follow. If you're not following him on YouTube, he's doing loads of stuff on YouTube now. I've put the link to his channel in the description to this video, so you can get to it nice and easily. And I mean, obviously, you're all following him on Twitter already, I'm sure. I'll be back next week. I've got a solo show coming on Tuesday or Wednesday. Haven't decided yet. Also, next Friday night, I've got another super secret special guest. So do tune in for that. Always every Friday, 7:30. If you want to get episodes of the podcast before everybody else, jump onto patreon.com/Aid Thompson. Or if you're watching on YouTube, there should be a little join button or a super thanks button, like to say thank you or join the community. There should be one of them. Anyway, you'll figure it out. So yeah, that's it from us. Thank you so much again for everybody tuning in. Thanks to my guest Femi, and we're out this motherfucker. Let me just stop the stream.